I'm arguing for a certain kind of intolerance. There's no way around that. But it's not the kind of intolerance that gave us the Gulag or that would put people in prison for their religious beliefs. I'm arguing for just new rules of conversation. We can call it conversational intolerance, where, you know, if I came on your show and said the Holocaust never happened, I would immediately feel pressure from you to justify that claim, or you would marginalize me immediately as someone who just could not be trusted, at least on European history. But if I come on your show and say that I'm in dialogue with the creator of the universe, or if I know a cracker literally becomes the body of Jesus if you say the right Latin words over it, you have to give me a pass. It's taboo to criticize that, and that's really what I'm challenging in my book. Well, there's not sufficient evidence for, certainly not for a personal God, and certainly there's no evidence that he wrote any of our books. And we have to realize that we are in a situation where people are flying planes into our buildings because they think God wrote their book and that they're going to get to paradise by dying in the right circumstances. And it seems to me a point of really exquisite obviousness that the response to this situation cannot be, sorry guys, God wrote our book and you're going to hell for your actions.
One of the arguments against science from the religious side of things is that science assumes from the start there's no supernatural realm or there's perfect regularity among the laws of nature, but that's simply not true. A scientist, if they were faced with something that was manifestly supernatural or a deviation from the regularities we observed in nature, we would try to understand that. We would not say, I just can't deal with that, I don't know what to do. We would approach it using the methods of science. The only assumption that science makes is that the world is not trying to trick us, that we are not a brain in a vat being taunted by a mad scientist, that we can more or less trust our sensory data, and we look for patterns in that data. Could there be miracles? Of course there could be, but you're faced with two worldviews, one of which that says that those eyewitness testimonies that Dinesh mentions of people who are regressing to past lives are mistaken. The other worldview says that all of the laws of physics that we think we know are wrong. And that's the choice you need to make. And the decision that we make is based on the same criteria we would always make. And imagine, let's just imagine that people who believed in God took that hypothesis, that idea, if you don't want to call it a theory or hypothesis, that's okay, that idea, just as seriously as scientists took their theories. What they would do is try to be skeptical about it. Can we disprove this? Can we use it to make a prediction and compare that to the data? And a lot of people talk about the problem of evil. My favorite problem is the problem of instructions. I am personally a textbook author. I have read Amazon.com reviews of my textbook. But if I were God, my textbook would be perfect. If God existed, the one thing that if there were an omnipotent being that cared about us here on earth, I would expect clear instructions. I would expect a book that I knew exactly what it said, it was clear that it was right, and I would be able to follow it. If God did not exist, I would expect all sorts of different books. They would contradict each other. Some of them would be brilliant in parts, they would be silly in other parts, they would be uplifting in parts, they would be very depressing in other parts, they would be edited collections, they would be personal memoirs, and they would all disagree with each other. Which of these two theories fits the data? Thank you.
You know, I get letters every day that I never got before, and those letters are from kids around the world, and also from people in small towns who tell me, and I'm just so happy I saw this, or I saw The Unbelievers, or I read your book, because I realized I'm not a bad person for asking these questions. I'm not evil. And that is, to me, something I really hadn't appreciated before, that religion has usurped this notion of morality, so that if you just say, just saying, you know, I don't buy it, automatically is equivalent to the saying, I'm not a good person. And that, to me, is the underlying most immoral aspect of religion. It tries to have a monopoly on morality and ethics. What it does is it makes people feel guilty for thinking for themselves, and I can attest to that from just the vast and every single day. I'm amazed at that, and I hadn't appreciated that as an evil before I actually started getting labeled and people wrote to me. So they did a further study, and they questioned people who claimed the Christian box. They said, do you believe in the virgin birth? Do you believe in transubstantiation? Do you believe this? No, 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 no. Why do you call yourself Christian? Because I like to think of myself as a good person. And I think most people call themselves Christians because they think if they don't, they'll be labeled as bad people.
That someone who bases everything on reason has faith in the reasoning process. What's wrong with saying that? Why can't you say, I have confidence in reason, I have faith in reason, I trust in the reasoning process? You won't say that because it will reveal that both our positions are faith positions. If you ask me why I believe in the Bible and I flip open the Bible and show you a verse, you say you're appealing to what you need to prove. If I ask you, why do you believe in reason, and give me a reason,
I'll tell you
then
what,
you open your book,
No,
you open the reason, and you give me a reason.
No, you're making a huge leap. I say that the Bible, like the Quran and like the Torah, is man-made, not God-made. It's a human-made literary accretion full of plagiarism, contradiction, fragmentation, and so on. It's like every other book ever written.
And I wrote
There's nothing divine about it, and the appeal to it saying, I can trump anything you say because here's God's word on the page, is a contemptible way of arguing.
I wrote a logic textbook. Does that make logic man-made?
Logic is man-made, yes. Yeah.
So there's no reason to follow it then?
No.
If I reject the Bible because it's man-made.
Logic is the attempt by humans to make sense. It isn't a divine endowment that we possess. Same with philosophy. Philosophy means the love of wisdom. We don't say it's the revelation by... You say what you have is revealed. Now, here's the way of clarifying the difference between us. Somebody asked earlier. I don't claim to know more than I can. Everything I've said this evening, I've backed by assertions, evidence, argument. Douglas Wilson, who's just as modest and friendly and tender a chap as I am, says, yeah, but I have an advantage over Christopher, because I know what God wants, and I know what he says in his book. I have access to higher authority. Now, what I want you, I'll ask him, but I don't care. I've asked him before. You have to ask him. How does he know that? And by what right does he claim to know the mind of God? And if you were a serious spiritual person, wouldn't you think it was a bit much that someone said they could come before you and tell you what God wanted? As long as they don't call it modesty, I don't mind. As long as they don't call it humility, I don't mind. But I don't like being told that my arguments aren't as good as his because he has divine information that's withheld from me.
I've talked about the fact that when I criticize the Muslim world and say this is a religion that is different than every other religion, liberals who I don't think follow this that closely, maybe they are now with ISIS, they get mad at me because they think I'm being bigoted toward a minority, which is ridiculous. But I've made the point that if this was the 16th century or the 14th century, I'd be talking about how Christianity is the religion that is way too violent, because that was the age, the 14th century, of the Inquisition and all the lovely things.
They hated
like
my people.
Burning
they hated my people for
Jews,
a while.
yes.
Yes.
Burning witches at the stake.
Yes.
And the 16th century was the age when Protestants and Catholics, which were the Shiites and the Sunnis of that era in that religion, were slaughtering each other the entire century all across the continent. But the Western world came out of that period, and we don't do that now. The Islamic world has not come out of that period, and that's why I'm a little more concerned with them than I am, say, the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Right.
And I hope that people are starting to get that idea in their head, that all religions are not alike.
Mother Teresa, endlessly praised for work that most of the time she actually never did. I went to watch her very closely in Calcutta. You don't mind that she thinks that what Bengal and Calcutta mainly needs is a campaign, a clerical campaign, against birth control and family planning. Has anyone here ever been to Bengal and concluded that's what it really needs? That's what she was really campaigning for, in case you're worried. But never mind. She gives a wonderful impression of being a charitable person. So what Indians need is more missionaries to cure poverty, when everybody knows there's only one cure for poverty, which is the empowerment of women, which means giving them some control over their reproduction. You name me a Catholic or Muslim charity that goes into the fields determined to secure the empowerment of women.
Well, let's
and you'll have the ghost of a point.
Let's see if Frank Brennan...
Until now you don't.
Let's see if
they seem to be in their Middle Ages. Yeah. Obviously, they have people who would like to return to the Middle Ages. I noticed they have 7th century ideals about beheadings and women and lots of free speech, and yet they're perfectly okay to use 21st century technology. I think you have to pick. If you say the word faith, which is what Hobby Lobby basically said, this is our faith, everything stops. Everybody just throws logic out the window and puts that at the head of the class. And nobody ever really says what I keep trying to say, which is faith. It just means that's my opinion. That's your opinion. Your faith is an opinion. I think it's a particularly stupid opinion. I've never understand why faith is good. People say the word faith and everybody just backs off. Just tell me why the purposeful suspension of critical thinking, which is faith, why that's a good thing. Why is this a good thing when you go, you know what? I'm not even going to apply logic to this situation. How about that?
Do you give people who make this case that that was the beginning and that there had to be something that provoked the beginning, do you give them an A at least for trying to reconcile faith and reason?
I don't think they're reconcilable.
What do you mean?
Well, so let me say that differently. All efforts that have been invested by brilliant people of the past have failed at that exercise. They just fail. And so the track record is so poor that going forward I have essentially zero confidence, near zero confidence that there will be fruitful things to emerge from the effort to reconcile them. So, for example, if you knew nothing about science and you read, say, the Bible, the Old Testament, which in Genesis is an account of nature. That's what that is. And I said to you, give me your description of the natural world based only on this. You would say the world was created in 6 days and that stars are just little points of light, much lesser than the sun. And in fact, they can fall out of the sky, right? Because that's what happens during the Revelation. One of the signs that the second coming is that the stars will fall out of the sky and land on Earth. So to even write that means you don't know what those things are. You have no concept of what the actual universe is. So everybody who tried to make proclamations about the physical universe based on Bible passages got the wrong answer. So what happened was, when science discovers things and you want to stay religious, or you want to continue to believe that the Bible is unerring, what you would do is, you would say, well, let me go back to the Bible and reinterpret it. Then you'd say things like, oh, they didn't really mean that literally, they meant that figuratively. So this whole sort of reinterpretation of how figurative the poetic passages of the Bible are came after science showed that this is not how things unfolded. And so the educated religious people are perfectly fine with that. It's the fundamentalists who want to say that the Bible is the literal truth of God and want to see the Bible as a science textbook, who are knocking on the science doors of the schools trying to put that content in the science. Enlightened religious people are not behaving that way. They're saying, yes, science is cool, we're good with that, and use the Bible to get your spiritual enlightenment and your emotional fulfillment.
1,000 years ago, the intellectual center of the world was Baghdad. Baghdad. Europe was busy disemboweling heretics at the time. Baghdad was open to all thought at the time, between AD 800 and 1100, around there. If you look at the advances that unfolded in that period, in that location, it includes the invention of algebra. Algebra is an Arabic word. Algorithm is an Arabic word. 2/3 of the stars in the night sky that have names have Arabic names. How does that happen? Where did the naming rights come from? It came from the fact that at that time, huge advances in the Middle East, in Baghdad in particular, was unfolded in engineering, mathematics, especially mathematics, astronomy, navigation, physiology. And you say, well, why is that so? If you look at what was going on, they were open to all lines of thought. Jews, Muslims, Christians. There were doubters back then. Today we would call them atheists. They would all come around a table and share ideas. If you have some philosophy that's got holes in it, someone's going to find it. And you're going to challenge you on those ideas. And what happens is the conversation ratchets up. You discard what doesn't work and you keep what does. And when you do that, you make discoveries, and you make discoveries rapidly. And at the time, that period drew to a close. If you read history books, they'll typically describe sort of the sacking of Baghdad. It was a bad time for the city. And they say, oh, it all came to an end. However, The Islamic culture rose at other times later. And in those other times, science and engineering discoveries were not a part of it. So we asked, why not? You got the cultural heritage, why doesn't it show up again? And then you got to dig a little deeper from the sacking of Baghdad, and you find out there was a Muslim cleric, Al-Ghazali was his name, who was to Islam what St. Augustine was to Christianity. St. Augustine kind of laid out the rules for how to be a good Christian at the time. A lot of people were practicing it in their own way. He codified it. He was a religious scholar, figured it out according to his own read, told everybody how to behave. There's the book. You follow this, you're a good Christian. Al-Ghazali said, you follow this, you're a good Muslim. In that text included the assertion, which gained influence socially, but then politically, so then it had power of influence. In there was the assertion that mathematics and the manipulation of numbers was the work of the devil. The entire enterprise collapsed and never recovered. It has not recovered since. If you look at the number of Muslims who have won the Nobel Prize in the sciences, it's 1. Number of Jews who have won the Nobel Prize? 1/4 of all Nobel Prizes in science have been won by Jews. How many Muslims in the world? 1.3 billion. How many Jews in the world? 15 million tops. So you look at what effect the culture of discovery and learning can have on what you discover about the natural world. It's extraordinary.
The fundamentalists have actually read the books, and they're right about them. These books are every bit as intolerant, every bit as divisive as the Osama bin Ladens of the world or the Jerry Falwells of the world suggest. And I'm not necessarily equating the two of them in moral terms. Once we dignify those claims, we are really hostage to their contents. I mean, the creator of the universe does hate homosexuals. If you read the Bible, at the very least, homosexual men, gay sex, is an abomination. It is spelled out in Leviticus. This edict is ramified in Romans. You can take Jesus in half his moods and get some really beautiful ethical precepts like the Golden Rule. But Jesus also said things like, in Luke 19, anyone who doesn't want me to reign over him, bring him before me and slay him before me. Okay? I guarantee you that the inquisitors of the Middle Ages, who were burning heretics alive for 5 solid centuries, they had read the whole New Testament. They had read the Sermon on the Mount. They found some way to square their behavior with the ministry of Jesus.